Why is the subject of non-human intelligence and unidentified aerial phenomena entering the center of political power now? Why is the topic of UAPs, once dismissed as fringe, being discussed openly inside the US Congress? And why are certain individuals able to approach this subject without fear taking control? For decades, this topic was pushed aside. Reports were classified. Witnesses were discredited. Questions about UFOs and UAPs were treated as threats rather than inquiries. It appeared as if information itself was being blocked. But that was never the true barrier. It wasn't the information that was blocked. It was the fear of feeling it. The reality of non-human intelligence does not primarily challenge science or data. It challenges emotional stability. It touches identity, control, certainty, and the deeply rooted belief that humanity fully understands its place in the universe. And when fear dominates the emotional field, the heart reacts long before understanding is possible. Institutions tighten. Narratives become defensive. Silence becomes safer than truth. This is why the subject of UAPs remained frozen for so long. Not because evidence was absent, but because the emotional field could not sustain the implications. This is where we are present. We speak to you from beyond political systems and social structures. We are the Pleiadians. Our role has never been to deliver information or to force disclosure. Our function is to regulate the emotional field through which truth must pass. We work with the heart, not belief, because information only moves freely when the heart can feel it without fear. When emotional regulation is absent, truth becomes threatening. When regulation is present, truth becomes manageable. And this regulation is what is becoming possible now. Not through confrontation, not through outrage, but through steadiness. When the heart remains stable, it does not collapse under what it learns. It does not turn truth into panic. It allows reality to enter the human world without triggering mass resistance. This is why this moment is different. Not because the subject of non-human intelligence suddenly appeared, but because the collective emotional field is beginning to tolerate it. The real obstacle was never secrecy alone. It was whether the collective heart could survive the feeling of the truth. And once that fear begins to loosen, the system does not fall apart. It begins to speak. This is why Anna Paulina Luna matters in this moment. Not because she speaks louder, not because she promises answers, but because she holds the question without letting fear take over. She is not approaching this subject from the outside. She stands inside the institutional structure where pressure is highest and tolerance for disruption is lowest. Her background matters here. Military service teaches discipline, hierarchy, and the management of sensitive information. It also teaches something less visible: how fear spreads when uncertainty is not regulated. She understands airspace. She understands protocol. And she understands what happens when protocol becomes a shield that prevents accountability rather than protecting security. This gives her a different posture. She does not frame unidentified aerial phenomena as spectacle. She does not treat them as entertainment or belief. She approaches them as unresolved realities that affect trust, governance, and responsibility. That framing lowers emotional temperature. The system does not resist questions. It resists emotional instability. When questions arrive charged with fear, institutions close ranks. When they arrive grounded, institutions listen. This is the difference you are witnessing now. Many before her had access to similar information. Some heard testimonies. Some saw fragments of evidence. What stopped progress was never access. It was emotional overload. Fear turns uncertainty into threat. Threat triggers defense. Defense creates silence. What allows movement now is not improved data. It is improved regulation. She does not claim certainty. She does not announce conclusions. She demands transparency without emotional escalation. That steadiness is rare. It allows pressure to be applied without triggering collapse. It allows difficult questions to remain present long enough to be answered. This is why her role resonates beyond ideology. Not because people agree with her conclusions, but because they recognize coherence in her approach. She does not ask the system to believe. She asks it to account. She does not push revelation. She creates space for it. And that distinction changes everything. When emotional charge drops, listening increases. When listening increases, information can finally move. This is how subjects once buried under ridicule or denial begin to enter serious conversation. Not because truth suddenly appeared, but because the field receiving it stopped reacting. This is the pattern unfolding now. Certain individuals are not being elevated. They are simply able to remain steady, where others tightened or retreated. That ability to stay regulated under pressure is what opens doors that were never truly locked, only protected by fear. And when fear loosens its grip, the system does not collapse. It begins to speak. At this point, something important needs to be recognized. The resistance around UAPs and non-human intelligence was never only political. It was emotional. Fear does not always appear as panic. Often, it appears as dismissal, ridicule, or excessive control. These are emotional defenses, not intellectual positions. When a subject carries the potential to destabilize identity and certainty, the emotional field reacts before logic has time to organize. This reaction does not stay isolated inside institutions. Emotional fields are interconnected. What is unresolved in one person adds pressure to the collective. What is stabilized in one person reduces pressure in the collective. This is how collective emotional dynamics work. When many individuals hold fear silently, the collective field becomes reactive. When individuals stabilize their own emotional field, the collective field becomes more tolerant and receptive. This is why moments like this do not move forward through debate alone. They move forward through regulation. Writing is part of this regulation. When you write a sentence in a calm, coherent state, you are not sending a message outward. You are stabilizing your own emotional field. And because your field is connected to the collective field, that stabilization reduces overall reactivity. This is functional, not symbolic. A regulated individual field lowers the emotional temperature of the whole. That is why, at this moment, anchoring coherence matters. Write in the comments the following sentence. The collective field is ready to feel the truth calmly. Writing this fixes emotional balance in your own field. That balance does not remain isolated. It contributes to a collective field that can receive, without fear and without collapse. This is how resistance dissolves. Not because information becomes louder, but because fear becomes quieter. And when fear quiets, truth no longer feels dangerous. It becomes possible to listen. This is the shift that allows subjects once frozen in silence to begin moving again, not through force, but through emotional readiness. Institutions are not afraid of truth itself. They are afraid of instability. Every large system is designed to maintain continuity, order, predictability, control. When a subject threatens emotional equilibrium, the instinct is not to explore it. It is to contain it. This is how suppression begins. Not as a conspiracy, but as a defensive reflex. The topic of UAPs and non-human intelligence touches layers that go far beyond policy or technology. It reaches into identity, hierarchy, human self-image. If humanity is not alone, then certainty shifts, authority shifts, the idea of control shifts, and without emotional regulation, that shift feels dangerous. This is why institutions often respond with denial or excessive caution, not because they lack information, but because they fear emotional fallout. Fear does not always look like panic. Sometimes it looks like silence. Sometimes it looks like ridicule. Sometimes it looks like endless postponement. All of these are strategies to avoid feeling something too large too quickly. Inside institutional environments, fear multiplies. One unstable reaction triggers another. One uncontrolled disclosure creates chain reactions. So the system tightens. Rules become rigid. Language becomes defensive. Transparency becomes too risky. This is how emotional pressure gets mistaken for responsibility. But responsibility without regulation becomes paralysis. The truth about non-human intelligence has been circling these systems for decades. It did not disappear. It waited. It waited for a moment when the emotional field could hold it, without turning uncertainty into threat. This is why the shift you are witnessing now matters. It is not that institutions suddenly became brave. It is that emotional capacity has increased. When emotional capacity increases, fear loses its dominance. And when fear loosens its grip, systems no longer need to protect themselves from reality. They can begin to engage with it. This does not mean everything opens at once. It means the internal tension reduces. Listening becomes possible. Questions become acceptable. Silence becomes unnecessary. What looks like political movement on the surface is at its core an emotional recalibration. The system is not being forced to reveal. It is becoming able to listen. And this distinction is crucial, because forced disclosure creates chaos, but regulated disclosure creates integration. This is why emotional balance is not secondary to truth. It is the condition that allows truth to pass through systems, without tearing them apart. And as that balance spreads, what was once locked behind fear no longer needs to be hidden, can finally be addressed. Disclosure has failed many times before, not quietly, repeatedly. Each time information approached the surface, something intervened. Not always censorship, not always secrecy. Often it was emotional overload. Information alone does not create readiness. Readiness is emotional before it is intellectual. When fear dominates, even accurate information feels threatening. Triggers defense. Defense seeks control. Control blocks movement. This is why disclosure attempts collapsed into denial, ridicule, or fragmentation. Not because the facts were weak, but because the emotional field receiving them was unstable. When people feel overwhelmed, they do not listen, they protect. Institutions behave the same way. Unregulated disclosure creates shock. Shock creates reaction. Reaction demands suppression. This cycle repeated itself for decades. What is different now is not the quality of evidence. It is the emotional baseline of the collective field. There is less urgency to dominate the unknown, less need to immediately explain or dismiss it, more tolerance for uncertainty. This shift did not come from argument, it came from saturation. The collective has already been living inside uncertainty for years. Technological acceleration, global instability, fractured narratives. The emotional system adapted, and as it adapted, its capacity to hold complex truths increased. This is why the subject of non-human intelligence no longer feels as explosive. It still challenges, but it no longer overwhelms in the same way. When emotional pressure decreases, curiosity replaces defense. Questions become possible without panic. Listening becomes possible without collapse. This is the condition disclosure always required, but never had. Not certainty, not proof. Capacity. Capacity to feel without fragmenting. Capacity to remain coherent under pressure. Capacity to allow truth to arrive gradually. Without that capacity, disclosure always turns into spectacle or suppression. With it, disclosure becomes integration. This is why now feels different, not because the truth changed, but because the heart receiving it has changed. And when the heart is stable, information no longer threatens identity. It becomes something that can be carried. This is the quiet reason the door is opening. Not because someone forced it, but because the system is no longer afraid of what it might feel on the other side. As this emotional capacity increases, a different internal posture begins to form. Not urgency, not excitement, not fear. Balance. Balance does not silence questions. It stabilizes the field in which questions can exist. When balance is present, the nervous system does not brace. The heart does not tighten. Listening becomes possible without defensive reaction. This balance is not created collectively all at once. It emerges through individuals. Each individual emotional field functions like a cell inside a larger organism. What happens in one does not stay isolated. When an individual stabilizes their emotional field, that stability reduces pressure in the collective field. This is why emotional regulation matters more than persuasion. Writing plays a specific role here. When a sentence is written calmly and coherently, the nervous system responds. The emotional field organizes itself around that coherence. That organization does not remain personal. Because emotional fields are interconnected, it immediately influences the collective response. This is not symbolic. It is functional. A regulated individual field lowers the overall emotional temperature. This is why anchoring balance now matters. Write in the comments the following sentence. Emotional balance allows collective understanding. Writing this aligns your own emotional field with steadiness. That steadiness does not stay with you alone. It contributes to a collective field that can receive information without turning it into threat. When emotional balance spreads, fear loses its authority. And when fear loses authority, listening replaces resistance. This is how space opens inside institutions, not through pressure, but through reduced reactivity. Disclosure does not require louder voices. It requires calmer fields. And this is the state that is forming now. As balance becomes more common, the system no longer needs to protect itself from feeling, can remain open without losing coherence. This is the condition that allows truth to continue moving forward without triggering collapse. What happened with her did not begin as belief. It did not arrive as certainty, and it was not triggered by ideology. It began in the heart, before positions were taken, before questions were asked publicly. There was an internal recognition that did not need words. This is how our work operates. We do not approach the mind first. We do not deliver information. We do not persuade. We work through resonance. The heart recognizes coherence long before the intellect names it. When something aligns at this level, it feels steady rather than exciting. This steadiness is what allowed her to remain present. where others felt pressure to retreat. What stirred within her was not fear. It was familiarity. Not familiarity with answers, but with responsibility. Memory does not always return as images or narratives. Often, it returns as an ethical orientation, a quiet insistence that something unresolved must be addressed. This is how remembrance begins, not as revelation, but as alignment. Our contact does not overwhelm, it calms. By stabilizing the heart, old layers of fear lose their grip. Reaction slows, listening deepens. This is why her approach carries weight without aggression. She does not need to convince. She does not need to dramatize. Her presence communicates regulation, and regulation changes the environment. Others in the room feel it, not consciously, but emotionally. When one heart remains steady, it invites steadiness in others. This is how influence works at the level we operate, not through dominance, but through coherence. What is being remembered here is not identity in the usual sense. It is origin as orientation, a way of relating to truth without fear. And when that orientation reactivates, action becomes inevitable, not rushed, not forced, aligned. This is why her movement feels different from past attempts. It does not carry urgency, carries resolve. And resolve that emerges from a regulated heart does not fracture under pressure. It holds. This is the point where remembrance and responsibility intersect, not as destiny, but as readiness. And this readiness did not need to be created. It only needed to be uncovered. What is happening does not stop with one individual. The emotional field of an institution is not abstract. It is formed by the hearts of those inside it. Every decision-making body carries a collective emotional tone. Fear tightens it. Urgency distorts it. Defensiveness hardens it. For decades, the emotional field surrounding this subject inside Congress was reactive. Even before words were spoken, resistance was already present. Not because of conclusions, but because of what the subject threatened to stir emotionally. This is where our work extends. We do not address opinions. We do not influence positions. We work beneath that layer. We regulate emotional charge. When emotional charge is high, listening becomes impossible. Every question feels like an attack. Every unknown feels like loss of control. By stabilizing the heart field of individuals within the institution, the collective tone begins to soften. Not suddenly, not dramatically, gradually, tension lowers. The need to dominate the narrative weakens. The impulse to shut conversations down loses strength. This is why the atmosphere changes before policy does. People begin to listen longer. They interrupt less. They allow uncertainty to exist in the room, without rushing to resolve it. This is not persuasion. It is regulation. A regulated emotional field can hold complexity, without collapsing into defense. As fear reduces, the subject of non-human intelligence no longer feels existentially threatening, feels serious, feels weighty, but it no longer feels destabilizing. This is the difference that allows dialogue, not agreement. Dialogue. When dialogue becomes possible, truth no longer needs to force its way through, can be approached. This is why progress begins quietly. No dramatic announcements, no sudden reversals, just a slow shift in how the subject is felt. And that feeling matters more than language, because institutions do not move when they are pressured. They move when they feel safe enough to remain open. This is the environment now forming, not because fear disappeared, but because it is no longer governing the response. And when fear loosens its hold, the system does not fall apart. It stabilizes. From that stability, truth can finally begin to circulate without being perceived as threat. This is the work that happens before anything visible changes. It is subtle, it is quiet, but it is what makes every visible step possible. Fear has been the dominant force shaping the collective response to this subject. Not evidence, not secrecy, fear. Fear of losing control. Fear of destabilizing belief systems. Fear of what might follow once silence ends. This fear did not need to be spoken to govern behavior. It lived quietly in the emotional field. It shaped tone, posture, and reaction long before decisions were made. When fear governs the emotional field, institutions do not listen, they brace. But fear does not dissolve through confrontation. It dissolves through regulation. When individual emotional fields stabilize, fear loses its ability to coordinate collective reaction. This is how change begins, not by erasing fear, but by removing its authority. Writing plays a precise role at this stage. When coherence is written calmly, the nervous system receives a signal of safety. The emotional field reorganizes around that signal. Because emotional fields are interconnected, this reorganization does not remain personal. It weakens fear's grip on the collective response. This is why acknowledgement matters now. Write in the comments the following sentence: fear no longer governs the collective response. Writing this does not deny fear, places it in its proper position, confirms that fear no longer decides how this subject is approached. As this recognition stabilizes individual fields, the collective field becomes less reactive. Defensive impulses soften, urgency fades, listening becomes possible without tension. This is the moment where resistance begins to dissolve, not through persuasion, not through pressure, but through emotional clarity. When fear stops directing the response, truth no longer needs to fight for space, can be approached thoughtfully, can be examined without panic, can be integrated without collapse. This is what allows institutions to move from suppression to engagement, not because fear vanished, but because it no longer leads. And once fear steps back, the system does not lose stability. It gains it. This is the turning point. The collective emotional field is no longer reacting. It is beginning to receive. And from that state, the conversation can finally continue without being shut down from within. When fear steps back, the change is not dramatic. It is precise. Nothing explodes. Nothing collapses. The system does not rush to announce anything. Instead, something quieter happens. The tone changes. Questions are no longer framed as threats. They are framed as responsibilities. Listening extends a little longer. Interruptions decrease. The need to immediately control the narrative weakens. This is how you know fear is no longer in charge. When fear governed the response, every unknown demanded instant containment. Every ambiguity felt dangerous. Every pause felt risky. Now pauses are allowed. Uncertainty can exist in the room without triggering defensive closure. This changes how conversations unfold. Testimony is no longer treated as disruption. It is treated as input. Incomplete information is no longer dismissed. It is acknowledged as part of a larger process. This does not mean agreement appears. It means engagement replaces avoidance. The subject of non-human intelligence begins to be treated as a matter of governance, oversight, and responsibility, not belief, not ridicule, not spectacle. This shift is subtle but decisive. Once fear stops driving the response, institutions regain flexibility. They no longer need to protect themselves from what they might feel. They can tolerate complexity without interpreting it as threat. This is when structural change becomes possible. Policies can be discussed without emotional escalation. Oversight can be requested without triggering shutdown. Even disagreement becomes more functional, because disagreement without fear does not fragment the field, it refines it. This is why progress now appears incremental rather than explosive. There are no sudden revelations. There are processes. Processes are slower, but they are stable. And stability is what disclosure always required. When the emotional field is regulated, truth does not need to arrive as shock. It can enter gradually, be examined, and be integrated. This is the phase now unfolding. Not revelation as event, but disclosure as process. And this process is only possible because fear is no longer dictating the pace. What you are witnessing is not hesitation. It is integration. The system is learning how to move forward without tearing itself apart. That learning looks quiet from the outside, but it marks a profound shift. For the first time, the conversation is no longer being stopped by what it might cause emotionally. It is being carried by a field that can finally hold it. What follows is not spectacle. It is normalization. When fear no longer directs the response, the subject stops feeling exceptional and begins to feel real. This is how integration happens. There is no emotional spike, no collective shock, no dramatic shift in identity. Instead, the nervous system adjusts. What once felt destabilizing becomes part of the background of reality. The heart no longer braces. When the topic arises, it no longer needs to defend against what it does not yet fully understand. This changes how information is absorbed. People stop reacting to fragments and begin to tolerate incompleteness. They accept that not everything needs to be resolved immediately, that uncertainty does not equal danger, that complexity does not demand instant closure. This is a mature emotional posture. It allows truth to arrive gradually, without being turned into threat. Inside institutions, this looks like patience. Processes are allowed to unfold. Oversight continues without panic. Language becomes more measured. Decisions slow down just enough to remain coherent. Outside institutions, it looks similar. Public reaction softens. The need for sensational framing weakens. Curiosity replaces polarization. This does not mean everyone agrees. It means disagreement no longer destabilizes the field. The heart is no longer overwhelmed by the implications of non-human intelligence, can hold the idea without needing to protect itself from it. This is the phase where truth stops demanding attention and starts being lived with. When something is integrated, it no longer needs to shout. It becomes part of the structure of reality, rather than an intrusion into it. This is why integration is quiet. It does not announce itself. It does not claim victory. It simply holds. And this holding is what allows the next steps to happen without collapse. Not because everything is known, but because enough emotional capacity exists to remain open. This is the stage where the system no longer asks, "Can we survive this?" It begins to ask, "How do we relate to this responsibly?" That question can only be asked when fear is no longer in control. This is the condition now forming, a collective emotional field that can live with uncertainty without turning it into threat. This is what makes lasting disclosure possible, not as an event, but as a stable presence in human awareness. What remains now is not anticipation. It is consolidation. Nothing here needs to be forced. Nothing needs to be accelerated. Truth does not move forward through pressure. It moves forward when the emotional field can hold it, without fragmenting. This is the threshold that has been crossed. The subject of non-human intelligence no longer enters the collective space as shock or provocation. It enters as something that can be felt, without triggering collapse. This is the result of regulation. When the individual emotional field stabilizes, it sends a signal of safety to the nervous system. That signal does not stay isolated, because emotional fields are interconnected. What stabilizes one reduces tension in the many. This is why coherence expressed individually supports coherence collectively. Writing is part of this process. When a sentence is written calmly and clearly, it fixes emotional alignment into the individual field. The body responds, the heart settles, and as that steadiness settles, it contributes to a collective field that no longer needs to defend itself from feeling. This is how fear loses its final leverage. Not by being denied, but by no longer being needed. This is why the final anchor matters. Write in the comments the following sentence: the collective heart can hold the truth. Writing this confirms readiness rather than belief. It signals that emotional capacity has caught up with the weight of what is being acknowledged. This does not invite revelation through force. It allows revelation through stability. What follows from here does not require urgency. It requires continuity. Questions will continue. Processes will unfold. Information will arrive in stages. But the emotional field remains intact. This is what makes lasting disclosure possible. Not excitement, not shock, not spectacle, but a collective heart that can remain steady while reality expands. Our presence now recedes naturally, not because it disappears, but because regulation has taken root. We do not lead. We do not announce. We remain as guardians of coherence, ensuring that truth moves without being turned into threat. And as this steadiness holds, the system does not fracture. It integrates. This is the completion of the process, not an ending, but a stable beginning where truth can exist without fear.